So why do photographers charge so much? Well, so much can mean different price points for different people. So for some, maybe a lot for a photography session is $300. For others, maybe $300 sounds like too cheap and $6,000 sounds like too much to them. I've noticed that usually clients only think about the time that the photographer or videographer is on site. They don't think about the hours of editing, the drive time, and all the other expenses that it takes to run a photography or videography business. So let's just jump right into some of the expenses that photographers and videographers have to pay for, and also some of the things the client is paying for when they're hiring on a photographer or videographer. So the very first thing is the skill and experience of the photographer and videographer. This is basically taking into account how much experience they have and how they value their time. So that's just one thing to consider. The next thing is if a photographer or videographer is on site for just an hour, and let's just say they charge $1,000 for that 1 hour. You just got to keep in mind that you're also paying for their time to drive to and from the session. There's probably some planning calls and getting ready and preparation for the shoot, which sometimes that can take a large amount of time to just prepare for the shoot. And on top of all that is the hours spent editing. So if you're a photographer or videographer watching this, just make sure you're taking into an account your own hours that you're spending doing all these things, and don't undervalue yourself, because I know it's easy to do, and I think it's something a lot of creators struggle with. So the next expense is taxes. So if you're a legal business, you're gonna have to account for paying taxes on whatever you earn. So that's just another expense on top of all the other expenses that we're gonna get to in a minute. The next thing is business insurance. So this is typically a yearly or monthly cost, and it just kind of varies on the price. But if you're doing client work, you should have business insurance to protect yourself just in case anything happens on site. The next thing is editing software. So you can find some editing software for free, but most of the time you're gonna be paying for a Lightroom and Photoshop subscription, which is $9.99 a month. And for videographers, you also have to take into account that you have to pay more for Adobe Premiere to edit the videos. So that's roughly an extra $20 or so a month. The next thing is the software you use to share the photos to a client. So some people do this different ways. Some people use Google Drive, which is free up until a certain amount of storage, and then you have to start paying for it. But a lot of photographers use an actual gallery sharing website to share the galleries to the clients. And these kind of subscriptions vary, but it's still a monthly cost that you're gonna have to consider. So I typically send my galleries through my mUcH website, which is a good segue into the next expense, which is a website. So yes, you can create a free website and share that link for your business website, but typically higher end, or for any photographer who wants to look a little bit more established, they are paying to have their website domain name, their subscription to host their website, like Wix, Squarespace, and there's multiple others as well, but that's still calculated into a monthly or yearly expense for photographers and videographers. So the next one is payment processing fees. So this is for all like online sales, not including like cash and checks, obviously, but if clients are paying digitally through a link or some kind of software, the photographer or videographer has to pay those processing fee expenses. And while we're talking about those processing fees, a lot of photographers are using Dubsado or Honeybook or some other software on top of those fees, paying monthly for a subscription for a CRM service where clients can sign contracts, questionnaires, pay their invoice through, everything like that. So usually on top of those fees is the monthly subscription to one of these services. I use Honeybook for mine, and that's how I collect a majority of my payments and send off contracts and everything like that. I think my subscription to that is around $19–20 or so, but the price will vary depending on what plan you choose and which program you go through. So the next thing is the accounting software to keep track of all your income and expenses. I use QuickBooks and I can't remember the price of that off the top of my head, but you can also get some free accounting software. I just prefer QuickBooks, but Zoho Books is another good free accounting software. And it's free up to a certain point. I can't remember what like the guidelines are for that. They do have a really good free version, but QuickBooks is my favorite and that's just what I like using. The first couple years of my business, I didn't have an accounting software. I was just keeping track of everything like through a spreadsheet. You could do that to start out with. I personally wouldn't do it that way for too long because I think it's nice to have an accounting software where you can run reports. It's just more reliable and straightforward in my opinion. I just enjoy it a lot more. So the next expense is if the photographer has a studio space. They're more than likely paying rent or a mortgage payment or something along those lines to have that studio space. And so that's gonna take up a big chunk of their expenses per month if they own or rent a studio space. And even if they don't have a studio space and they do location rentals like Airbnbs or just renting out other studios in the area, that's still gotta be a price to consider to add on to the session total. So the next thing are hard drives. It's good to keep your client work on a hard drive, and especially when you start photographing more and more clients. And if you're doing videography, that space is going to fill up quick. So you're going to need to invest in some hard drives. I would suggest buying a pretty big sized hard drive. And I use a few different external hard drives, but I will link my favorite in the description. So the next thing that you're gonna need is a decent laptop. So I wouldn't suggest using a little cheap laptop, and obviously you can if you're just starting out, but you're gonna need to reliably run the editing software, especially if you're editing videos. You're gonna need a decent laptop. So the next thing is education and coaching. So maybe not all photographers do this, but I highly suggest it. This is for hiring a business coach or buying online courses to expand a photographer or videographer's knowledge on their skill or how to run their business better or a better client experience and things like that. So that's just another expense to consider because good coaching and good courses are not cheap. The next thing to consider is if you're going to a location that's going to charge a permit to photograph there or a fee to enter or anything like that, you're going to want to make sure to bundle that cost into the session. Because sometimes, especially when it comes like national parks and things like that, the permits to photograph or videograph anything there could be pretty pricey. So I would definitely look into those costs before quoting a customer on an engagement session or elopement or anywhere you're gonna go that might need a permit. And the other expenses are just the obvious ones like the camera, the lighting, the memory cards, the batteries, the tripods, and all the other equipment that a photographer may have. And especially if you get into videography, there's a lot more added costs that you have to consider as well. Like subscriptions to websites that offer royalty-free music that the videographer has to pay for so the client's videos won't get flagged. Hard drives with more space on them because video files take up a lot of space. You'll also need gimbals to stabilize the videos, constant lighting instead of just flashes, mics for the video, and video editing software, which we kind of touched on earlier. And possibly a whole new camera that records better videos than what you're taking photos on now. A while ago, I had to upgrade my camera so I could buy a camera that took way better video footage than my old one did, where I was only using it for photography. Okay, so that basically sums up the general expenses of a photographer and videographer. And I also wanted to just make it a point. If you are just starting out in photography or videography, start small and start with the basics. You don't need to go out and buy a whole array of equipment, pay for a whole bunch of subscriptions where it's just gonna get you in the negative when you're just starting out. So just start out basic with your camera, try to shoot places with natural light before investing in a whole bunch of lighting equipment and just things like that. Just start with the basics. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.